I know it was a very long day, especially for those of us who started this morning at the Italian Cultural Institute at 10. It's almost 10, 12 hours around the clock. But I'm very, very happy with our three events that made one, our Trinity, Calvinian Trinity. And Duccio, we finished with you and with your work. So you were saying at the beginning what it meant Calvino for you, and we're going to go back to that. Just a couple of words about Duccio. Duccio is a documentary maker and a filmmaker. He made both feature films and documentaries. The last time he was our guest here, we presented his family documentary of a very uncomfortable family history, L'Occhio di Vetro, fantastic documentary. And I think they invited you back today in one of the classes here at NYU, right, with David Forgash, and you talked again about L'Occhio di Vetro. So if you have not seen it, try to see it. It's a very different way of facing the historical documentary as a genre. And you were our guest before with your feature film, Short Skin, that you presented at Open Road at the Lincoln Center. And that's when we met. And he's been adopted, basically, by Casa, with an exclusive on the presentation of his films in New York. And we are very, very, and we're very, very happy that you're here with us for this. So you were saying at the beginning that you admire Calvino both as a writer and for his role as publisher, as the role that he played within the Einaudi publishing company for Italian literature, way behind the things that he wrote. What did you know about that? Because it's not something that, I mean, they knew that he had an association with Einaudi, but very few people know what he really did. And it's something more for the addetti ai lavori, for people that are in that kind of field. So what did you know about Calvino as a publisher of other writers?
First of all, thank you again for inviting me, and always an honor and a pleasure to be here. Well, it's hard to be short on this answer. I'll try my best. When I was a teenager, I was really fascinated. I became fascinated with Cesare Pavese back when I was 13, 14. And very soon after that, I fell in love for Beppe Fenoglio. And I discovered through Beppe Fenoglio and Pavese that there had been a group of intellectuals that were formed and educated by their professors, Pietro Chiodi in particular, in the classroom in the Liceo d'Azeglio di Torino. And that group, Fenoglio was coming from Alba, it's a different story. But to me, it was very fascinating, the idea that from high school, from a group of students, came the future cultural renaissance of Italy. Einaudi Publishing Company was founded by Giulio Einaudi with the idea to, together with his friends, with his colleagues, the important element of working together, as we saw in the movie. And the idea was try to oppose the fascists with ideas. So the logo of Einaudi says, Spiritus durissima coquit, the spirit is able to fight and stand against the most hard things. Few years later, I stupidly play Braveheart in a remote land in Scotland, and I end up.
You played?
I played like we were kids, and me and a friend we decided.
So you actually played
the
role of Braveheart? Okay, just trying to understand.
The result is I lose my Interrail ticket, and I don't know what to do. I am afraid that if I'm gonna tell my parents I did that, they're gonna tell me, "Good for you, come back home. We're not gonna pay for a second one." And I wrote a letter to my teacher of philosophy, say, "Professor, could you buy me a new ticket for the train? And could you send it to Edinburgh? I'm gonna be there." So the next day, I spent 8 hours locked in a bathroom, in a toilet, in the train, and I read the Lessico Familiare by Natalia Ginsburg. And I'm so into that atmosphere of the 40s, of the Nazis looking for Olivetti and other intellectuals hidden in that. At some point, I even think they're looking for me because the controller is knocking on the door. And I write a love letter to Giulio Einaudi. And a few months later...
All these in a toilet of a train in Scotland.
Saying thank you for what you did for Italy, basically. And a few months later, Giulio Einaudi, the secretary, calls me and says, "Mr. Einaudi would love to welcome you in Torino." And so at that point, I had to study. And so my love became even bigger. And I had the great honor to spend a full day with Giulio Einaudi. He took me around the high school. And so I became really obsessed. I studied all the stories of Casa Einaudi. And this is when I came across Calvino's work and Calvino's interviews. And of course, I had loved Barone Rampante. Of course, I had loved Marco Valdo. But in that moment, I was able, and I read for the first time Calvino interviews about the role of communist intellectuals in Italy in the 50s. And there were beautiful descriptions in which, to me, came to life because I always knew about Budapest. I mean, always. I had studied history and I discovered that. But in the words of Calvino, I could really understand.
Budapest is 1956 when there is the revolt in Hungary.
Yes.
And when a lot of intellectuals in Italy and the rest of Europe leave the Communist Party that was still aligned with the Soviet Communist Party.
Yes.
That's the time at which Calvino also leaves the Communist Party.
Exactly. Those interviews made me fall in love with him. Because it was very important to me as a student of history, of law, whatever I was studying, but to understand the relation between the writer and the community, the writer and his political context, the writer and his time. And so when finally, many years later, I was asked to make a documentary, my first idea was to make a film about this, to make a film about how someone's mind can be shaped and interacts with his community, with his time. Because many times, what I see is, in movies, you really dig into some literature aspect or other more intimate stuff. But to me, it was really interesting to try to to understand and to narrate the relation between the writer and its time. And so it was because of these grounds.
Did the producer of the documentary, whoever asked you, knew about your passion? Because it's a very unusual, again, interest for a young man, for a young student, specific the history of publishing in Italy and the role that the publishing world exercised in the cultural world in general. So how did they know that you had this passion for Einaudi?
They didn't know.
They didn't know.
No.
Right.
Francesco Siciliano, Paolo Rossetti, and Riccardo Bru, the three producers, have worked with me on a TV series. I think maybe I mentioned that I had a love for Einaudi, but I didn't remember that. But they kind of feel that I could have been the right profile on. And so when they asked me, I said immediately yes.
And Duccio, there are some characters in the film, some people that you interview, not characters, some real people that one would expect. Of course, one is Giovanna, and then the teacher, the professors, the experts on Calvino. But then there are also some unexpected characters. I think of Paolo Virzì, that I like very much, and Bollani. And that's just wanted to know, how did you make the connection between them and Calvino? And or how did that work? You chose them, somebody else chose them, and asked them.
No. At some point, this experience has been really incredible for me. Also, at some point, I realized that the producer gave me complete trust and freedom. At some point, I felt it was too much freedom because I had to basically run the show by myself. So that's why I appear as a producer as well. And of course, the first instinct was to, after we knew Giovanna was on board, Ernesto Ferrero, but I had some intuitions. I started by watching all the interviews that Calvino gave, and I was really touched by his way of trying to find the right words. There is this beautiful letter, since we talked about Calvino's letters, there is this beautiful letter to Cicita. They met, I think, 2 months before. And when he says to her, I really would like to spend time with you, he offers this table of choices. And so
it's an Excel spreadsheet.
Yes.
Pros, the cons, and this and that.
And to me, that
like applying math to love.
It was really, really beautiful. But at the same time, in that moment where, sorry, I got a bit lost. I was saying that.
The letter to Cicita?
Oh, yes, Paolo Virzì and Bollani. So the way Calvino starts talking, it seems to me something like very similar to when I go to some concert and jazz player is trying to understand what he's gonna do, and he's trying to find the right tune. And the time Calvino takes in finding the speed, I thought maybe Bollani has something to say about this. So I called his agent, and the surprise was that Bollani.
Maybe not everybody here knows about Bollani.
Sorry, Stefano Bollani is an incredible musician, an incredible jazz player, but also a great. I don't know how to define an histrionic narrator of stories through music, and he's very talented in explaining music and bringing people into the magic of music. And he has a TV show that's quite funny with his wife. And I don't know. I said, look, let's see what he has to say. And he said, Calvino, it's my greatest love. My first composition that I ever made is called Palomar. No one knows about this, so I don't know how you felt, but I'm on. And so I said, great. Virzi, on the other hand, of course, there is common story in Italian culture about the way all screenwriters and film directors, because Calvino has such a visual impact and his visual approach to stories, they all try to get him on board their projects. But Calvino's reaction, as we know from the documentary, was always kind of detached and unsure. But while I was rereading all the novels that I had to reread and I had to go through again, I was really impressed by a novel that I never read before, and it's called La speculazione edilizia, because I found that it was a great document to tell the story of the sense of despair and isolation of communist intellectuals after the battle was won. The Speculazione Delizia tells the story of this brilliant intellectual. His desire is to create a philosophical magazine. He's really trying to understand how the battle that he fought on the mountains, being a partisan, could be continued in real life. But around him, everyone now is only thinking about making money. And he also wants to make money. And so, as Ferrero brilliantly said, he's tempted by the same vulgarity that he wants to fight. But the way Calvino writes this, it's very cinematic. He doesn't go deep into psychological representation. With literature, it seems that his myth Hemingway was really there with him, because the way he shows and tell by just showing, it was very cinematic. And so I said, he also reminded me somehow the screenplay of C'eravamo tanto amati by Ettore Scola, in which somehow we have same characters, three people, they had been in the war together, being partisans, and then life and story scatters them around in different roads. And if I had to think about an Italian contemporary director that is similar to Scola, I think about Virzi. And so I call Virzi, and again, it's like the intuition was a bit out of focus, because you see, I never read the Speculazione Edilizia. If you want, I will read it. But Calvino is an idol for me, especially for his short stories. And and these are the two persons you asked me about. Yes.
I don't want to monopolize the discussion. If there are questions from the public, we can take them. And we have a microphone there. So why we're not going to insist, because we know it's a very long date. Then the microphone here. I'll ask you another question. But Calvino had a very ambivalent relationship with cinema. He loved cinema. As we know, he loved being in a movie theater, seeing films, talk about them, but then very skeptical when it came to turn his work into films. And he mentions one film here, and of course, Cicita and Giovanna continue with that distance from both theater and the screen, not really allowing adaptations for. So how do you explain this fascination and love for cinema, and at the same time, the desire not to be turned into a movie?
Well, I would quote the answer that gave me Martin Rueff about the difference between literature imagination and cinematic imagination. And it's kind of relevant to me as well, because the moment in which I had to decide how to approach visually this film, of course, for 1 second, you can also be tempted to try to create your images to go along with Calvino's. But that made me really tremble, because I would never wanted to do that. So the way we played with this with my director of photography was, well, first of all, for once in my life, I could use the drone, because there is a reason to go high on things. Normally, I wouldn't do it if there is no reason. So once we defined that our main interest would have been the point of view, then we decided to play more than anything with the archives. So to try to find a way to follow the ideas without trying, I don't have that confidence, and I'm happy I don't have it, because I was feeling more like making a service. So the idea that I could create images uh, to go along with Calvino's, it would be strange. So we decided to play with the archives. So and especially for the extracts of the Baron in the Trees, uh, and there is one beautiful extract that to me really completely changed my whole vision, and is when Calvino make Cosimo realize how we see differently the world when we work together or when we are on our own. That page in which he sees you, when you work in a community, when you are part of a community, you see the best coming out of everyone, and you're surprised by how many good people there are and how they behave in the world. While instead, while you are on your own, you're always tempted to to put the hand at the gun, and that's something that really resonated a lot with me. And so we were trying to find images that already existed. So I would say that probably he had an intuition that his narrative was very precious for a lot of artists and a lot of readers, not just artists. And so the idea that someone transformed that kingdom of freedom in which you're able to define and create your own words would have always been brought down and immobilized forever in a dimension that he maybe didn't want to. And and I think he was right. I think maybe that's one of the reasons for which he's still so alive and beautiful, because everyone can picture his own images of Italo Calvino.
Thank you. Great answer. Thank you. We have a question here.
Well, I have several questions, but I'll condense it. Did you? I remember earlier in the film you showed some illustrations that he had done. Did he have any favorite comics or illustrations or artists, Matoti or somebody like that? And if you had him today and you wanted to ask him about something, particularly the political situation of this very confused world, what would you like to ask him?
The first question is easy.
Yes. Well, my role has been has been an incredible journey, and I felt very lucky and honored to be part of this. But starts with the fact that I'm not a literature student. So many of the things I felt the need to go through as much as I could, ask to people that knew more than me as much as I could. But as much as I dig and I try to come with answer, I don't cover all of his life. So I knew that he was fond of Corrierino dei Piccoli. I knew that he's always been fond of comics and stripes and short illustrations. And that's the incredible idea of the Cosmo comics. Because comic is not in the sense of funny, in the sense of the American comics. And in Italy, this is not so immediate to understand. But another thing is that what we were struck, the images that we found, and I think I saw Professor Di Nicola here before, that we found this box so when Cicita passed away, all the books of Italo Calvino and his office and everything went to Biblioteca Nazionale di Roma. And one day, while trying to recreate the library as it is, and it's beautiful, they found a box that contained all these cartridges of cinema of 9 millimeters were not even 8 millimeters; they were 9.5, like impossible to play anywhere. So when we actually,
And they were family home
there
movies?
were a lot of like part of it was stuff that Mario Calvino filmed that
Some
we
of
see,
them, yeah.
and others were kind of home movies that Mario rented from Pathé and that projected on the walls in the 20s. And it's incredible that when we first saw that, we were also kind of struck by the power of it, because we realized how Calvino, as a young kid, could have been influenced by this imaginary, not only the parents, not only the gardens, but also the cinematic aspect. So again, the power of his imagination and looking at the experiences he lived were always something that we wanted to keep with us in the film. And I would ask him so many things, and I don't know if I have an answer for that.
And especially, I don't know whether he would answer.
Yeah.
Famously, as Giovanna said many times, when journalists would come Calvino and ask him questions about, what do you think about the contemporary situation of politics or this law that he's passing, he would normally answer, I'm a writer. I really don't follow very closely that specific thing, but I have a good friend that if you call him, I'm sure he has something good to tell you. And he would give them the number of Moravia, and of course Moravia would basically give a statement just about anything, and he did. So it's another way in which Calvino, and of course he was not shy about the important battles that he chose to fight in Italian contemporary society, divorce, abortion, and several others, but always very, let's say, one step back from the person that wants to say his opinion just about anything, even if it's not really his field. And I think it's all the time that we have. But we prepared a little present for you, who stayed here until the very end. And it's a couple of minutes clip from our previous event on Calvino, when we had Richard Gere here. Richard Gere, the reason why Richard Gere came is that Giovanni invited him, of course. And Richard has wanted to make a movie based on the Baron in the Trees forever. And every time he went to Rome, he would go see Cicita, that of course loved to be courted by Richard Gere. And so she would let him see if he can present his case, and inevitably say no. But that was enough for Giovanna to invite him, and he kindly accepted to read some parts of the Baron and to talk about his relationship with Calvino. So if you don't mind, since your film is the Writer in the Trees, we're going to have Richard Gere reading from the new translation of the Baron in the Trees. Please thank again Duccio Chiarini for being here with us.
Thank you.